There's a photograph from 1943. It shows a girl, maybe 13, maybe 14. She's standing in a mountain forest, holding a rifle that's almost as tall as she is. Her face is hard, emotionless. This isn't a girl playing soldier. This is a girl who's already killed people. Her name was Zdenka Tomanović. She wasn't a soldier in any official army. There's no record of her rank, no medal for her service, no recognition from any government. In fact, if you search for her name online right now, you'll find almost nothing. A single paragraph in one obscure history book. But here's what makes her story so haunting. She's not unique. Thousands of children just like her were fighting in occupied Europe during World War II. Not as refugees, not as prisoners, as active combatants, as guerrilla fighters. Some were as young as 8 years old, and almost nobody knows their names. This is the story of the children the world forgot. The children who were forced to become killers before they were old enough to understand what death meant. The children who lost their childhoods to a war they never started. And it's a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about World War II. The date is April 6, 1941. Germany invades Yugoslavia. For most of the world, this is just another headline. Another country falling to Nazi occupation. Another line on a map that changes color. But for the people living there, everything, absolutely everything, changes in a single day. Within 11 days, Yugoslavia surrenders. But surrender doesn't mean peace. It means something far worse. The Nazis don't just occupy Yugoslavia, they systematize its destruction. Entire ethnic groups are targeted for elimination. Intellectuals are hunted. Political enemies are executed in the streets. Families are torn apart. The resistance scatters. Desperate fighters flee to the mountains and forests, trying to organize, trying to survive, trying to fight back against impossible odds. And among them, mixed in with the soldiers, the political prisoners, the hunted intellectuals, are children. Not as refugees waiting to be rescued, not as evacuees being moved to safety, as active combatants, as soldiers. Her name was Zdenka Tomanović. She was born in Belgrade in 1929. Before the war, she was a normal girl. She went to school. She played with friends. She had a family. She had a future that she could imagine. Maybe she'd be a teacher, maybe a nurse, maybe she'd fall in love and have children of her own. But in 1941, when she was 12 years old, that future disappeared. Her father was a Yugoslav military officer. When the Germans came looking for him, because he refused to collaborate with the Nazi regime, the family didn't have time to plan. They didn't have time to say goodbye to friends or pack their belongings. They had to run. They fled to the mountains. In those mountains, Marshal Josip Broz Tito was organizing resistance fighters. Thousands of desperate people, soldiers, civilians, people of all ages, gathering to try to liberate their country. It was a chaotic, brutal, dangerous existence. Food was scarce. Winter was deadly. The Nazis hunted them constantly. Zdenka was just a girl when she arrived in those camps. Being a girl didn't matter anymore. In the mountains, everyone had to contribute. Everyone had to be useful. Everyone had to fight. The partisan army couldn't afford to send children home. They needed every person who could hold a weapon. So Zdenka Tomanović, age 12, was given a rifle. What did it mean to be a child soldier in the Yugoslav partisan resistance? It meant learning things that no child should ever have to learn. How to handle a rifle, even though your hands are too small and it weighs almost as much as you do. How to move silently through forests at night. How to recognize the sound of enemy patrols before they see you. How to sleep in sub-zero temperatures without blankets. How to survive on a handful of bread when you're starving. It meant watching adults die, watching friends die, and learning not to cry about it, because crying was a luxury. Grief was a distraction you couldn't afford. Zdenka learned all of this before she was a teenager. By the age of 14, in 1943, she was a full member of Tito's partisan forces. Not an auxiliary, not a helper, a combatant. She carried a rifle. She went on missions. She participated in combat operations against Nazi forces. And most devastatingly, she had already killed. The details of her combat record are sparse. The partisan forces didn't keep detailed records of individual soldiers, especially not children. But we know she was there. We know she fought. We know she survived things that killed experienced soldiers. She wasn't alone. This is where the story becomes almost impossible to comprehend. Zdenka Tomanović was not an exception. She was not a rare anomaly. She was one of thousands. Throughout occupied Yugoslavia, estimates suggest that between 30,000 and 50,000 children fought in partisan resistance units during World War II. Some sources put the number even higher. These weren't children evacuated to safety. These weren't young people in refugee camps. These were active combatants. Some were as young as 8 or 9 years old. They came from all backgrounds: Serbian children, Croatian children, Muslim children, Jewish children who had escaped the Holocaust. They were united by a single, desperate reality: their country was being destroyed, and fighting back was the only option left. The Nazis had intelligence reports about child fighters in the Yugoslav mountains, but they largely dismissed these reports as propaganda. How could children be real soldiers? The very concept seemed absurd. Surely these were exaggerations, rumors, fantasy. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Because here's what the Nazis didn't understand: children were actually better at certain aspects of guerrilla warfare than adults. They could move faster through difficult terrain. They could climb steeper mountains. They could hide in spaces where larger soldiers couldn't fit. They required less food, which was critical in a starving resistance. And most importantly, they were invisible. A 10-year-old girl approaching a German checkpoint seemed harmless, unthreatening. Why would you suspect a child? She looked like she was lost, or hungry, or just trying to find her way home, until she was close enough to throw a grenade. The partisan forces understood this, and they used it. Zdenka wasn't the only one. Her story was mirrored across occupied Europe, in ways that have largely been erased from history. Simone Segre was an Italian Jewish girl. When she was 11 years old, her family was being hunted by fascist forces. She didn't go into hiding. She joined communist partisan units fighting in the Italian mountains. For 3 years, from age 11 to 14, she lived as a guerrilla fighter. 3 years of starvation, 3 years of constant danger, 3 years of knowing that capture meant death, torture, and execution. She survived, but the psychological cost was immense. Maria Okokaljic was a Serbian girl who joined the partisans at age 13. She became known among resistance fighters for her bravery in mountain combat. But like so many others, her story was barely documented. Her name appears in almost no historical records. We know she existed, we know she fought, we know she survived, but we don't know much else. Her life is a ghost story. In Poland, children as young as 10 fought in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943. They weren't trained soldiers. They were just children who picked up weapons and fought against an occupying army that was systematically murdering their people. In Greece, child resistance fighters joined communist units resisting Nazi occupation. In the Soviet Union, thousands of children served as partisan fighters. Some are documented. Most are lost to history completely, and there were roles beyond direct combat. Children as young as 8 and 9 served as messengers and scouts. They had to navigate minefields. They had to slip past enemy patrols. They had to move through winter weather that killed hardened soldiers. Many of these children died doing jobs that adults considered too dangerous to risk. The scale of this is almost impossible to grasp. What does it cost a child to become a soldier? What happens to a 12-year-old's mind when she has to kill someone? What happens to her sense of the world, her sense of safety, her sense of what's possible and what's acceptable? We don't have good answers to these questions, because most of these children never talked about it. There was no therapy, no counseling, no recognition that what they had endured was traumatic and devastating. After the war ended, these child fighters simply disappeared back into civilian life. They had to become teenagers again, go back to school, pretend that nothing had happened, carry their nightmares in silence. Zdenka Tomanović survived the war. She lived to adulthood. She became a nurse, dedicating her life to healing, perhaps trying, in some way, to balance the scales of suffering she had witnessed and inflicted. But she never fully left those mountains. The psychological toll was permanent. The trauma was permanent. The knowledge of what she had done, what she had been forced to become, that never left her. Of the estimated 30,000 to 50,000 children who fought in Yugoslav partisan units, approximately 4,000 were killed in combat. Thousands more died from disease, starvation, and exposure in the brutal mountain conditions. But the children who survived, they faced a different kind of death. The death of innocence, the death of childhood, a psychological devastation that lasted for the rest of their lives. Here's what's particularly haunting about these stories: how completely they've been erased from history. You've probably heard of Freddie Overstegen, the Dutch girl who lured Nazi soldiers to their deaths on her bicycle. Her story has become relatively famous. It inspires documentaries. It circulates on the internet. It reminds us that courage transcends age. But Zdenka Tomanović, she remains almost completely unknown outside of Yugoslavia. And even within Yugoslavia, her story is fading. Why? Part of it is the Cold War. After 1945, Yugoslavia became a communist state. In Western Europe and America, we didn't want to celebrate brave communist fighters. It didn't fit our post-war narrative. So the stories of Yugoslav resistance, including the stories of child soldiers, were largely suppressed in the West. Part of it is geography. These stories came from Eastern Europe, from countries that were increasingly isolated from Western media and cultural conversation during the Cold War. The Iron Curtain didn't just divide politics, it divided history. What happened on one side of it was invisible to the other side. And part of it is deeply uncomfortable. The idea that children could be forced to kill, that children could be hardened by war, that childhood wasn't sacred and protected, but something that could be stripped away by circumstances beyond anyone's control. We didn't want to think about that, so we didn't. Zdenka died in 2003 at the age of 74. Her obituary was small. Her story barely circulated. A woman who had given her childhood to fight fascism, who had endured horrors that would break most adults, died in relative obscurity. The story of child soldiers in World War II isn't just a historical curiosity. It's not just a forgotten chapter we need to remember for the sake of completeness. It's a warning. It's a mirror we hold up to our own present moment. Because even as we tell ourselves that we've learned from history, that we would never let this happen again, children are being forced to fight in conflicts around the world right now. In Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East, there are children with guns in their hands today, robbed of childhood exactly like Zdenka was robbed. An estimated 300,000 child soldiers are active in armed conflicts worldwide. 300,000, we've learned nothing. The story of the 12-year-old girl who became a guerrilla fighter isn't just about World War II, it's about now. It's about the fact that we continue to allow circumstances to destroy childhoods. We continue to allow children to be forced into violence. We continue to pretend this isn't happening because it makes us uncomfortable, and we continue to forget the names and stories of those it happens to. Music becomes quieter, more reflective. Zdenka Tomanović's name appears in exactly one major English-language source. There's no Wikipedia article about her. No major documentary. No viral video telling her story to millions. She died in 2003, and almost nobody noticed. Her name was Zdenka Tomanović. She was born in Belgrade in 1929. She became a guerrilla fighter at age 12. She survived. She lived to be 74 years old. She worked as a nurse. She healed people, but most of the world will never know her name. There are thousands like her. Thousands of names lost to history. Thousands of childhoods stolen. Thousands of stories we'll never know because we stopped looking for them. They were real. They existed. They suffered. They fought. And we've forgotten them.